So for me, this is a very exciting opportunity to describe what I think is a challenging and potentially very fruitful project, which there are members of the audience here who are actually investigators in this global cooperation. So I'm going to give you details, but I just want to mention something that Jan brought up. The associates program is free of charge. So I think we should mention that.
It's free.
Right.
You don't need to pay to become an associate.
Exactly. Okay, no conflict of interests. So look at these percentages. I know probably half of the audience thinks that's percentage of microbial diversity, and the other half thinks it's the odds that your football team will win a game this year. But actually, because I'm a little weird, when I look at this, I think about epidemiology. And these are the figures that have been published probably for the last 20, 30 years of what the global prevalence of IBS is. Because I'm a bit of an iconoclast, which you might translate into troublemaker, I've always wondered where these numbers come from. And I've tried to go back and understand. And all that I found is that people quote each other. So sometime way back, somebody wrote that the global prevalence of IBS is 10 to 20%, and since then, people have been quoting it. And you really will find it difficult, although, as I will show, there is some foundation to this, to understand how they actually reached that figure. So here are a few questions that I would pose to myself and maybe to the audience. Number one, is IBS a universal disorder? And I think the answer to that is yes, but we will find out more as we move on. What is the global prevalence of IBS? My own personal answer to that is we don't know. And what is more important, global or regional prevalence? And here I'm going to go into this in more detail as I describe the project that we're doing. But I think that the answer is that probably regional prevalence is more important than overall single figure global prevalence. So why don't we know more than we do, actually? And I think it's because of the heterogeneity of studies. If you look through the studies that have been published, they really have enormous variability in terms of how the subjects were selected, what the study population was made of, where it took place, what were the diagnostic criteria used, and all of these have terrific variations, so that you could have, for example, one study which only looked at night shift workers among nurses in a hospital, and it would give prevalence of IBS, but is that in any way possible to compare with a national survey in some other country? So there are many problems with the possibility of pooling data and trying to come up with some kind of specific figure. And this is an example. Please don't quote this. It's totally made up. You can't find this anywhere in the literature. It's just out of my feverish mind. But here's an example of the point that I'm trying to bring across. So let's say in 1998, a study was conducted in the United States using ROM1 diagnostic criteria. It was a national sample conducted by telephone, whites only as inclusion, and the result was that IBS has a prevalence of 10.4%. Another study was done in Uruguay, 2005, using ROM2. It was conducted in an urban neighborhood by mailed questionnaire. There were no exclusion criteria, and the result was 6.8%. A third study was conducted in Pakistan in 1994 using the Manning 2 criteria. It was done among hospital workers by personal interview, only people that spoke the local language, and the prevalence of IBS was 24.6%. This is fine. Each one is a study which you can or cannot critique the methods, but they stand on their own and they have a result, and that result is or isn't representative of the population that is studied. The problem develops when we start making too much out of it. So, for example, this kind of thing could appear in an article which says the pooled prevalence of IBS is 13.8%, which is true if you take these three studies. And that global IBS prevalence ranges from 6.8 to 24.6%. and that the prevalence of IBS is much higher in Asia than in other regions. Now, I'm purposely taking this to an extreme because this is what actually happens in our literature. People take totally heterogeneous studies and pull them together and try to come out with some kind of conclusion, which is probably non-contributory, may be a nice way to put it. And then also this problem of statistical interpretation. Politicians are great at that. They put spins on everything. Here's an example. If 70% of the population suffers from hemorrhoids, what conclusion can you reach? So, I mean, we can do basically anything with statistics if we want to. Now, here's data presented to me by Shin Fukuda from Japan. These are 5 different studies conducted in Japan. All of them use the same diagnostic criteria, Rome-2. The prevalence rates range from 1.1% to 31%. So if I were to pose the question, what is the prevalence of IBS in Japan, how would I even start to think about it? And you can think about it. I mean, you can look individually and see why are these differences so great? What happened? But just to look at it and say, okay, I have a picture of IBS, we really don't. This is data from Max Schmolson from Mexico. Again, 5 studies, not the same diagnostic criteria in each of them, a range from 4.4% to 35.5%. Once again, startling differences in the results of these studies. Now, this has gotten me to thinking, and over the last probably 15 years, I've been very involved in this whole cross-cultural multinational thing. And there really is a challenge in cross-cultural multinational research, which I think can make a terrific contribution to the field of the functional GI disorders. So in 2009, I published a paper presenting the issues as I see them and a proposal for things that I think that we can do. And then, among other things, the Rome Foundation developed a global initiative which has many, many arms to it. This is just one of them. It includes a translation project and outreach and symposia and the professorship and so on and so forth. One of them was in 2011 to establish a working team on multinational cross-cultural research. And this working team worked for 3 years. And it published a paper on the conduct of multinational cross-cultural research in the functional GI disorders. And we also published a full 52-page report. If anybody's interested, you can download it from the website. If you have insomnia, it's very good. If you don't want to read so much, then the article can also put you to sleep. The second thing was the conduct of a systematic review of IBS epidemiology. And just as we're getting started on this, Alex Ford published his, I think, landmark study on the epidemiology of IBS. In this study, and I think yesterday he mentioned this, 11.2% pooled prevalence. This was 81 studies with 261,000 subjects. So we do, and if you notice, it actually does fall in the range of 8 to 15 or 10 to 20%. But at least this is a systematic review, which is a little different from what we were having up until that point. We decided to continue with our review, and in fact, I remember corresponding with Alex by email about, you stole our thunder, what did you do? But we decided to do this anyway. And one of the reasons is that we had the advantage of having PIs in each of the world's regions who were fluent in the major language of that region and also very well connected with the investigators, so that we were able to get very much with greater ease information which was far-reaching in terms of review of the literature. Interestingly, if we take a look, in the final analysis, we whittled it down to 83 studies. The other was 81. We had 288,000 subjects, 261. The similarities are quite startling, I think. The methodology was different. The age range was different. The minimum number of subjects. There were differences in the reviews, but actually came down to a very similar number of studies. But our conclusion was a little different, and we actually, you could see our global pooled prevalence hidden away in one of the tables, and I'll show it to you now, but we didn't actually discuss the global prevalence at all because our feeling was that it's really not something that we can rely on. And the reason was that there's such a great heterogeneity of studies, even after we started 1,650 studies and ended with 83, the heterogeneity was still so large that we did not have confidence in the results that we got of pooled global prevalence. And you can see here, some of it here. There were great differences in the prevalence among regions, which is fine. It's actually fertile ground to look into the reasons for the differences between the regions. The overall total we got was 88.8%. But the problem was that over 99% of the variance or the variation was residual due to heterogeneity, which makes it very difficult to draw conclusions from the results. And only 19.1% was actually explained by the results. And that's the reason why we felt that we really should present the data, but not necessarily say that we know what the prevalence, the pooled global prevalence is. Now, we tried to look into reasons for regional differences and for other differences. And there are two major things, one of which I will go into in a little bit more detail, which is local biologics. That's a term from the medical anthropology discipline, and cultural and national differences in symptom experience, interpretation, and reporting. Just for the latter, which I won't go into, just an example. In India, and this is something that's been reported by Uday Ghoshal, children, because of the diet, usually have 2 to 3 bowel movements per day, and adults as well. As they move over more to a westernized diet, it goes down to 1 or 1 to 2 a day, and people are very likely to interpret and report that as constipation because it's a change in bowel habit, which is very different from what we would interpret or report as constipation. Local biologics include all of the various factors which are of interest to us in trying to understand associations between them and the phenotypes of the functional GI disorders that we have. So it includes cultural and ethnic differences, diet and nutrition, lactose intolerance, bacterial considerations, transit time, the background level of hygiene and infection, stress and stress response, and genetics. And as you see, we have tried to work much of this into our global study. So that brings me to the actual study, which we have been working on now for about 5 years. The goal is to conduct an extensive multinational epidemiological study of all the functional GI disorders. This is not an IBS study, it's a study of all the disorders, to gain reliable regional estimates of prevalence and to evaluate the reasons for differences among regions, to advance our understanding of pathophysiology, because there can be some hypothesis generating from the results of the study, and as we'll see, to generate a large database that can be mined for future research. In 2013, we established an executive committee for this global study. The committee, I think, is characterized and highlighted by the wide geographical range between the various members. So we have people from Eastern Europe, from various parts of Asia, from Latin America, from Australia, from Africa. In addition to that, we have an expert statistician and research methodologist who has been helping us from the very onset work out the proper way to conduct the study. And we have an expert in data handling and in questionnaire development. So we've tried to cover all of the various aspects in preparing the study. Jan already showed this, but I think I'll go over it a little bit more. There are 33 countries participating in the study, 4 in Latin America, that would be Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico. Canada, the United States, and Australia. In Western Europe, there are 7 countries, Belgium, France, Germany, Holland, Italy, Spain, Sweden, and the UK. In Africa, Ghana, Nigeria, and South Africa. In Eastern Europe, Poland, Romania, and Russia. In the Middle East, Egypt, Iran, Israel, and Turkey. In Asia, Bangladesh, China, India, Indonesia, Japan, Malaysia, Singapore, and South Korea. So I think you can get a feel for the spectrum and the breadth of what we're trying to do here in terms of all of the number of countries involved and the geographic representation that we have. The study is based primarily on the following protocol. We are recruiting 2,000 subjects per country. The truth is, at the beginning, we wanted more. We just don't have the budget, but we have statistical analyses which show that 2,000 is enough. There are a few countries, China, India, and Mexico, where there'll be more, a larger number of recruits or participants for many reasons. 50% female, 50% male, and soon I'll show you what we actually have in some of our early results. The age distribution that we aimed for is 40% in the 18 to 39-year-old group, 40% in the 40 to 64-year-old group, and 20% in the 65 and above, which, as you'll see in a few countries, has turned out to be problematic, and I'll show that to you. We want to have an urban and rural mix. At first, we tried to define that, and this is defined very differently from country to country and region to region. So what we're doing is defining it by the size. For example, you live in a place where there are up to 2,000 population, or up to 10,000 population, or up to 50,000 population, and we're trying to define this in terms of the types of places that people live in. In terms of the survey method, this is being done by a professional internet survey company in 26 countries. And in 9 countries where they don't have the infrastructure to do it by internet, we're doing it by household interview. 2 countries, and possibly a third, because somebody at this meeting yesterday approached me with the idea of also doing both ways, are going to be doing both household and internet surveys. And we're doing our best to make sure that at least half of the household interviews will be conducted with the same geographical representation that the internet survey covers. So that is Mexico and China that will have both internet and household interviews. The study questionnaire is a very detailed questionnaire because we're trying to cover as much as we can. I'll give you some information about how it works and how long it takes, because there's always the concern about participant fatigue and things along that line. It includes the entire Rome 4 adult diagnostic questionnaire, and we've added 7 questions which cover the Rome 3 diagnostic questionnaire for IBS so that we can make comparisons between Rome 3 and Rome 4. We've also, Jan mentioned the fact that there are places, for example, in Asia, where there are concerns about the diagnostic criteria. The major point of contention is that we have removed discomfort and left only pain as a criterion for IBS. And the Chinese and some others have said that discomfort is a very important concept for them. So we are actually doing the Rome 4 diagnostic criteria with 1 question that has pain and discomfort and 1 question that has pain only. And we're going to see whether that really has the type of effect that we're concerned that it might have. And then there's a supplemental questionnaire, which includes basically many of the local biologics that I mentioned earlier. So this covers socio-demographic data, comorbid symptoms and conditions, living conditions up to the age of 7, and living conditions at the present. So if somebody grew up in a place where there was no electricity, or the outhouse, the bathroom was an outhouse in the backyard, we will have that information. Medical and health history, previous GI infections as a proxy for post-infection IBS, medications, psychosocial variables, diet, quality of life, and then each country was allowed to add up to a certain number of questions for specific issues of interest to them, which were added to the questionnaire. I actually removed some slides because I was afraid I was going to go over time, but now we have 1 less talk, so I can go back to it. The questionnaires were translated by a professional translation company into 21 languages. Those are the major languages that are needed for the study. This was done by very rigorous methodology. We accompanied the entire process in every one of the countries. The country PI accompanied the process as a monitor. And then we localized further, which I may have a slide on, into another something like 18 languages in quotes. So for example, Spanish was translated for Mexico, but then was localized for Spain, Colombia, and Argentina. French was translated for France, but it was localized for Belgium and Canada, and so on and so forth. The database, when we complete the study, will contain about 80,000 records. It will include, obviously, all of the FGI diagnoses by Rome 4 and IBS diagnosis by Rome 3, a wealth of sociodemic and other data, psychosocial and cultural variables, and all of the local biologics that I mentioned. And it will be made available, I'll discuss in a moment the protocol that we have in place for future data mining, so that people will be able to propose a study that they're interested in doing using this database, and we will have a protocol in place so that it will determine priorities. Obviously, not everybody can work on the database at the same time. Who has the right to access to the database, or do we receive from you a request for statistical analyses and we do them and provide you with the results? All of this is actually, at the moment, being determined and decided on. In terms of publications, we expect, depends on just how we handle this. But if you just think that each country will have its own country paper, that's already 33 papers. It's more likely that over time and over the years, each country will have a lot more than that because they may want to look at different aspects on a country basis, comparison of Rome 4 and Rome 3, effect of early lifehood, living conditions, and all sorts of other possibilities. We will have a primary major paper which will some kind of succinct summary of the results, the highlighted and most important results of the study, and then there will be additional global studies. We have at the moment a few methodological papers which I think would be of interest. The first is how you conduct a study of this magnitude. Questionnaire composition and translation, comparison of internet and household surveys. That would be primarily China and Mexico, and some other things. And then we expect to have interregional, regional, and country publications. Just go back a moment. We have just put into place a protocol determining three things, basically. One is publications, priority for publications, order of publications. The second is authorship. And the third is access to the database. And all of these things will be a carefully prepared protocol, which has already actually been written, so that it will become available eventually to people that are not in the global study itself, so that they will also be able to approach. There will be some prioritizing to pharmaceutical companies that have sponsored the study, because obviously a study of this type costs a lot of money. And one of the pledges that we gave them is they can't access the database, but they can query the database through us. So that will be one aspect. And the other will be any academician or researcher who is interested in applying to query the database in some particular thing that interests him. We are setting into place the mechanism for doing this. So if we look at the timeline from 2001 until today, we have been planning, 2013 until today, we've been planning the study. It started with the executive committee. It continued with the country PIs. And basically, the planning stage is over. We've completed all of the translations. We've actually started conducting the research. And the little time that I have left, I don't know what my situation is, but I will I can't give you results. I don't know them, actually. And we are embargoing the results until all of the studies have been completed in all of the countries, and our rate limiting factor is the household surveys, which will take longer than the internet surveys. But we do expect by this time next year to have all of our results and initial analyses and be writing the first papers. And at that time, it will be made available. The embargo covers the country PIs. So, for example, I will not know the results in Israel until mid-2018, even though they may be available in another 2 or 3 months, because it will be embargoed for myself as well. A minute about the actual internet surveys, because this is of concern to people. there are a few things that I'd like to say. Number one, we have seen, and I'll show you some of it, that the methodology is quite rigid and good. It gives us a wonderful representation along the lines that we requested, and I'll show you data on that. There's always the potential, obviously, of bias. Some sectors of the population don't use the internet, and all sorts of other things, which I'm sure you can raise as well as I can. However, the same really applies, if you think about it, to questionnaires that are mailed out to people, to telephone interviews, to any other method of data collection. There are always going to be advantages and disadvantages to the method of data collection. In our opinion, and I hope you'll see that, we've actually found this to be a very advantageous way to go. And by the way, I think it's the future. I think that mailed questionnaires and telephone questionnaires are by the wayside, and household surveys will probably be less and less as more and more countries gain the infrastructure to do an internet survey. So where do we stand? We've completed the internet survey in 12 countries that you see here. We are about to start in 6 countries. We're staggering this so that we can work together with the internet company. The internet surveys will be completed by January, so that 26 surveys will be done by January. The internet survey takes about 2 weeks for 2,000 respondents. One of the greatest concerns that we had was how long it would take to do the interview. By the way, one of the advantages there are some very striking advantages. Number one, the person can choose the language they want to do it in. They just have a drop-down menu. Let's say for Israel, they can answer in Hebrew, Russian, and Arabic. So they can choose the language that they want to answer it in. There are no possibilities of getting messed up with skip patterns because the computer automatically does that. So if you answer, with the way the questionnaires were done until now, you could answer no, and it says if you answered no, skip to question 59, but then the person continues to answer 52 to 59 even though they weren't supposed to. Here that cannot happen because the computer automatically does the skip patterns. We have found that the entire questionnaire, and it's a large questionnaire, on average takes 21 minutes to complete. And one of the reasons is that obviously the majority of respondents do not have a functional GI disorder. And actually the skip patterns just take them right through the questionnaire because they don't have to, as soon as they said no to something, they don't have to answer the next 10 questions. So this is taking much less time than we thought and were concerned that it would take. We also have a series of questions which show whether somebody's paying attention or not. And they're embedded in the questionnaire, and if somebody has answered those in a way that it's obvious, for example, it might say, if you have completed, I don't remember exactly, but it says if 30% of what answered C, and if the answer is anything else, that person is disqualified. And the company is committed to replace them with somebody else so that we get the 2,000 minimum that we require. We're about to start the household surveys in 5 countries, Ghana, Nigeria, Bangladesh, India, and Malaysia, and the other 4 will be coming up as we go on. I expect to finish the household surveys sometime by the end of the first quarter of 2018. So here's some interesting data. If you look at the information here for the UK, Australia, US, Spain, Italy, and South Africa, and you look, for example, at the distribution by male and female, you can see that we have an absolute 50% distribution, which is what we asked for. If you look at the age groups, which were supposed to be 40%, 40%, 20%, you can see that in the first 5 countries, it really is remarkably 40%, 40%, 20%. And an exception is South Africa, where the company was not able to get a large enough representation in the 65 plus, so we're aware of that problem there, and we will have to deal with it. The same thing for the rest of the countries that we've completed. And here, what is interesting, which is different from South Africa, is that if you look at the 3 countries where we were not able to get enough 65 pluses, if you look at the 40 to 65 plus, together those actually reached the 60% that we wanted for for the two of them, but we had hoped it would be 40% and 20%. But at least the division between up to 40 and from 40 and above is still 40, 60%. This, I think, is even more interesting. I'll give you two examples, the United Kingdom and Australia. If you look at the United Kingdom, what we have here is the region as defined by the census. If I remember correctly, I wasn't involved in that. The number of people that we have from that region in our sample. You can see the percentage of the national population for that region by census and in our study. And if we go down this, you can see that in the Midlands, the census is 16%, we have 15%. Southeast, 13.8 against 14.7. Northwest, 11, 12.6. London, 13.2, 10.4. And you can see that if you, with a slight margin of error or a plus minus, we are very, very close to the representation of the national census in those countries. And that gives us a lot of confidence that we are in the right direction as far as that goes. If you look at Australia, you can see the same thing, 31.2, 27.5, 24.9, 24.4, 20, 24, 10, 10, 7, 8, and so on. I don't have to go through all the numbers, but the representation looks very good to us, and we're seeing the same thing in country after country. We don't know the results, that's embargoed. We have been looking at this, and as a matter of fact, Oli Polshin, who is the database handler, gets this information on almost a daily basis as the study is being conducted, and he's in constant contact with the Internet Survey Company, and he looks and he says, hey, look, it looks like you're not getting enough from this region or from that age group or this sex, and then they make adjustments in order to try to work it out. So to summarize, I hope I wasn't too quick. To my mind, our knowledge and understanding of the epidemiology of the functional GI disorders can be improved, to put it nicely. We're conducting a 33-country study using rigorous methodology. The preparation stage continued for about 5 years, and now we're well into data collection. We expect to publish our first results in mid to late 2018. I hope that's not too optimistic, but even if it takes more time, we're going to try to get it right and not just rush to publish. And we will have a very large database for future research. And what we hope to do, one of the thoughts that we have in mind, the Rome Foundation, I hope this is okay to say, but we are looking into establishing a Rome Research Institute. And at some point, the Research Institute will use the same questionnaire for other studies, which could include biobanks, biosamples, fecal, urinary, blood, biopsies from mucosa, using the same phenotypical categorization system, but now have all the same details, including biosamples from people. So that's one of the directions that we're looking and thinking about going into. But even as it stands now, we will have a database of over 80,000 records, which will be available at some point for people to mine for their own studies and their own data. So I leave you with the view of the Sea of Galilee from the porch of my house in northern Israel, and thank you for your attention.